You are listening to the Bat Flip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian here with my co-host, Matt. We are coming to you on November 9th of 2021. We're going to bring you the qualifying offers, which players got that, which players have already decided to decline that. We have a couple small items of news that has happened already in this offseason. We'll hit some rumors, and then we'll jump into our top 15 free agency predictions that the top 15 guys we decided to pick from the list. But before we get into all that, how are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing great. Well, I say that I've got a little bit of a cold, but other than that, I'm doing great. I've been watching college basketball started tonight, so I was watching a little bit of the Auburn basketball game. They should have a pretty good team this year, and so I've been, yeah, everything's going pretty good. Just chugging along. Still in. Still don't think it's sunk in about the Braves World Series yet, but I'm excited to talk about a little bit of off-season stuff, and um, it's gonna be a long and one of the more interesting off seasons we've seen in a long time, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially with all the news that we've had, just the week that the season has been over, really, and the quiet period really just ending Sunday, and we've already had so much news, just as we're recording this Tuesday night. But let's go ahead and look at the players that received the qualifying offer so far. Freddie Freeman was the first one. Eduardo Rodriguez, Nick Castellanos, Trevor Story, Carlos Correa, Justin Verlander, Raisel Iglesias, Corey Seager, Chris Taylor, Michael Conforto, Noah Syndergaard, Brandon Belt, Robbie Ray, and Marcus Semien all received the qualifying offer.
Yeah, so that's an interesting group. Guys who it appears are gonna legitimately reach the free agent market and not get a last second contract extension, and we'll see. There's a few of those in there that are candidates to take it. One was expected to be Michael Conforto, that he was a candidate to take his, but he already declined it. And I believe did John Gray decline his too, didn't he?
No, he didn't even get one.
He didn't get one. Okay,
No.
that's
The,
right. That's right.
the
The thing about John Gray was that he didn't get one, where people were expecting him to possibly get one.
Yeah, we've had three players already confirm that they have declined it, and that's Nick Castellanos, Corey Seager, and Michael Conforto.
Right, and I would expect that Freddie Freeman will decline it. He might already have. Carlos Correa will decline his. Most of those guys will decline, but um, like you said, you could see. I think the big ones remaining are Noah Syndergaard that could potentially accept his. Um, Brandon Belt, there was talk about him, although I think he's kind of expected to not accept his, but there's a possibility. Justin Verlander was one that is possible. So, but the rest of them I think are probably gonna be declining there. So definitely, I think we've only had, I think it was something like 8 or something so qualifying offers since that became a thing that have actually been accepted. So not too many of them so far. So we'll see what ends up happening there.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think and many of these other ones are going to accept it. Syndergaard, Verlander were basically the main two um, that we could see. We thought Conforto, like you said, but he's already basically declined that. So it's going to be interesting to see how the market plays out for these guys. A guy like Chris Taylor, Eduardo Rodriguez, Raisel Iglesias, how that affects their market being attached to a draft pick compensation at that point, because that might limit the teams that want to go out there for them and maybe hurt their overall value. But it'll be interesting to see for sure. But let's go ahead. We had a player get claimed on waivers already, and that's Wade Miley. Got claimed by the Cubs after the Reds put him on waivers.
Yeah, so Wade Miley was a guy who has a 1 year, $10 million option on his contract. So he was going to become um, it was a team option. So the Reds had the choice of bringing him back if they wanted to, but we'll get into it in a minute. The Reds are a team that appears to be wanting to cut payroll down. So we're looking at him potentially. They didn't really want a $10 million veteran pitcher, and Wade Miley actually had a pretty good year this year. His peripherals were good, and he backed it up with a 3.37 ERA, which was really nice. And the Cubs saw him sitting there on waivers and thought, hey, he can immediately help our rotation. He's not that expensive. We'll have him he's a 1 year guy. He could be a stopgap and, really help us out. And they were able to bring him in. And so we'll see. Wade Miley's a solid starter. He threw in that no hitter this year. He's had some really good seasons in his career. Specifically 2018 with Milwaukee, he was good in 16 starts to a 2.57 ERA. In this past year, a 3.37 ERA in 163 innings. So he could be a really nice lefty innings eater that the Cubs haven't really had since the days of John Lester.
Yeah, and he's not too terribly expensive, like you said, at $10 million, and basically to get him for free. You didn't have to give a prospect for it. I was a little bit surprised that the Reds didn't trade Wade Miley. They've said that they didn't really have anybody really calling or too interested in him, but I find that a little hard to believe, maybe just because it's been so early in the offseason. Had they waited a little bit longer, they might have got something, but it's a really solid pickup for the Cubs because, like you said, it's a lefty innings eater. I think more of it says to what the Reds and the A's are kind of doing. Of we just kind of want to shed payroll, even if it's a not too terribly expensive for what the player is going to offer your team that year. To just shed that money is more important to them.
Yeah, and you look at Wade Miley. One thing about the potential to trade him is that I don't really think you're getting that much surplus value. I think probably on the free agent market, there's several pitchers out there, like another pitcher we'll talk about here in a couple minutes, that are worth very similar value to Wade Miley, and you could have just signed one of them. So I think it would have been difficult to pry more than just a bottom of the barrel prospect that maybe a lottery ticket type reliever or something out of Cincinnati. For Cincinnati to get one of those, and I don't really think you probably could have gotten too much for him. I think he's just a similar case to like an Andrew Heaney, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, being one of the first signings of the offseason. But definitely a good pickup for the Cubs to have. I mean, they've got one of their guys now, and we'll see what Wade Miley has in store for 2022 in Chicago.
Yeah, so we'll just jump over to the guy you just mentioned, Andrew Heaney. It had come out late Sunday night that he was going to be one of the first people to sign on the free agent market this year. Teams kind of viewed him as the next Robbie Ray, as a guy who had really underperformed the type of stuff or peripherals that teams think he can put up. And he ended up signing Monday with the Dodgers on a 1 year, $8.5 million deal.
Yeah, Andrew Heaney has been throughout his career a very decent mid rotation starter. Especially in 2018, he put up a season of 180 innings, where he threw to a 4.15 ERA, which was backed up very well by his peripherals. He's always underperformed those peripherals. A 368 xFIP in 2018 in 180 innings is almost more of a top of the rotation type or number two starter type thing. But he's underperformed that. Part of that's probably been due to the fact that the Angels' infield defense hasn't been very good, um, and the fact that he's a guy who's prone to making mistakes and giving up a high home run per fly ball rate, which has always hovered around or over 12%. Typically, has been in the 15 to 18% range. And this past season in 2021, with half of his season uh, in in New York and half of his season in Los Angeles with the Angels, he got rocked. And those peripherals, while his xFIP was still good and his expected ERA number was really good at a 4.01, his his actual ERA was a 5.83, and his FIP was high. He had an 18% home run per fly ball rate, which if you would hope would potentially go down. And you look at a team that in at Los Angeles with the Dodgers, it's definitely not as much of a hitter's park as Yankee Stadium. I think LA's park's fairly neutral, so the Angels park is fairly neutral, so probably not that much change from that. But um, Dodger Stadium's typically been known as a little bit of a pitcher's park, and also Andrew Heaney's ground ball rate has had dropped a lot this year. In his career norms, it being more of the 38 to 40% range. He was down to 33% this year. That probably led to a lot of fly balls with a high amount of them leading the yard. Was not a good combination for Andrew Heaney, but he did put up great strikeout and walk numbers, and he's got good swing and miss stuff. And as we've discussed, his curveball has been a really good swing and miss pitch.
Yeah, so it's more about what the Dodgers see in being able to get him to unleash the curveball and maybe a fastball much more. He's a guy like Matt said that had his ground ball rate dropped this year, but that's a lot to him leaving a lot of pitches directly over the middle of the plate and not getting them down in the zone. Um, but there was an article I was reading of through Fangraphs after the Dodgers signed him, and it said that if he could become more of a high fastball, low curveball guy, that could unlock another part of it because his high four seam fastball, even though it's only topping out 92 to 93, generates a lot of swing and miss compared to other fastballs about that same velocity. But what that allows is it allows the curveball to work more down. And that this year alone, his curveball generated a whiff on 35% of the swings. So if they can turn him into that high fastball, curveball, kind of they come out of the same plane and drop down, maybe they have found something in Andrew Heaney. Also, he's also somebody who's always given up a lot of hard hit balls, usually right around that 39 to 40% range in his career. So that's going to be something that they're going to want to for sure, try and figure out a way to limit that hard contact. And part of that's going to be just not him throwing the ball directly over the middle of the plate anymore. So
Yeah,
or go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you start talking about some of those guys who have transitioned more to high fastball and curveball type pitchers, which is something that the Dodgers have done a lot of with a lot of their guys. I mean, you saw with Walker Buehler being that type of pitcher. Clayton Kershaw's always been that type of pitcher. You look at maybe even Max Scherzer when he went from Washington to L.A. this year in the trade. He might have started being more of a high fastball and then slider, but
Arias
um,
even too.
breaking ball. Urias is the same way. That's kind of been one of their things. Some of the pitching staffs that have been real successful recently. The Astros being another one who kind of made it famous, being the high fastball, good high spin curveball type thing. And sometimes when Andrew Heaney's a guy who's thrown a lot of sinkers and two seamers, and sometimes when you go to that four seamer and throw it up in the zone more, you might add a tick or two on your velocity as well. He might be somebody who's next year throwing more, if he's able to do that, throw more 93, 94. And, it's also a low risk signing. It's only $8 million, and you might end up with a swing man type of thing, if anything else, that can eat some innings up. So definitely not a bad move here.
Yeah, not at all. Especially with the question marks around the rotation of what are you gonna re-sign Max Scherzer? Are you gonna re-sign Clayton Kershaw? What's the deal with Bauer? And what's with Dustin May still recovering from Tommy John? You're gonna need these depth pieces, kind of swing man's type per se. So it's not a bad signing at all. But let's go ahead and jump over to just a little news. We'll very quickly hit on this one. But we had mentioned Jace Tingler. He had been let go of the manager duties for San Diego Padres. He has quickly jumped on to be the Minnesota Twins bench coach.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Jace Tingler's a guy he's a young guy. He's good. I think he's pretty good with analytics and matches up well with a lot of front offices. Um, and I mean, it's definitely a case where Jace Tingler had a good season as a manager last year in 2020 in San Diego. He's done some good things. It didn't go his way in 2021, but there's enough to like about him there to give him another shot to kind of rejuvenate himself and be in that bench coach position where he's maybe not leading the clubhouse completely, but he's helping make a lot of decisions and doing some things and maybe even learning from the management there and getting maybe improving, get better. So definitely an interesting move for the Twins.
Yeah, and I think Rocco Baldelli is another guy kind of just like how Jace Tingler thinks. So maybe Tingler can pick up on some stuff that Baldelli does well, and maybe if he gets hired on as another manager, that experience will help him, and what he's learned from Baldelli will help him be a better manager next time, because he was still pretty good in San Diego, just kind of didn't quite know how to handle the clubhouse all the way. So it would be good for Jace Tingler. It's going to be interesting to see, what he can pick up from Baldelli and possibly get another manager's job. But let's go ahead and we'll hit on this rumor, and it's going to lead us into a little bit of a conversation. But Miami is one of the teams we had mentioned, the Cincinnati Reds and the Oakland A's, about maybe being a fire sale. Miami's not quite looking at that, but they are looking at possibly shopping one of their bigger starters, maybe an Alcantara, more likely a Pablo Lopez, but looking to trade one of those major league starters for an MLB established bat.
Yeah, Miami's in an interesting position because they have, I believe, if you count them, something like 7 or 8 big league ready or established big league starting pitchers, but they are pretty barren when it comes to the bats. They have a couple of good prospects at the bats, JJ Bleday being kind of their top one. A couple guys who have recently come up into the big leagues that look pretty promising, like Jazz Chisholm, maybe Sanchez. But they really need to add a couple of pretty good, bats, and they're really not. We talked about Miami a good bit before last season, but they're really not that far off from being a competitive team, especially with that rotation. Because when you have Alcantara, who I really don't think they're going to trade, when you have him, you add in Trevor Rogers, who is a potential rookie of the year. You add in, whatever you might get if Sixto Sanchez comes back, but you also have Edward Cabrera, who's a very promising looking prospect who got his first taste of the big leagues last year, and then Max Mayer, who is in who absolutely dominated AAA last year. So you've got some guys, and then some more depth pieces that were pretty good looking prospects that maybe like a Braxton Garrett or something who aren't total disasters as pitchers that could end up being pretty good major league pitchers. So you've got a lot of pieces there, and then the lineup. There's just not a lot of young talent in their lineup. I mean, you had a lot of innings and stuff from. I mean, Miguel Rojas is a pretty decent player. But I mean, you had a lot of innings played by Corey Dickerson over the past couple years, like a guy like John Birdie, who's not necessarily a guy you want playing every day, even though he's got his value as a speed guy and stuff. Um, you look at like Garrett Cooper. They got some contribution from Jesus Aguilar this year and Adam Duvall, who obviously Adam Duvall is gone, and Jesus Aguilar is still there, but Brian Anderson. They don't really have anybody who's a potential star player either. The closest thing they had was Starling Marte, but they had to trade him at the deadline, which made sense because he's a free agent now. But it's definitely interesting to look at. Their catcher situation is not fantastic, so they could probably. I think the Marlins would be wise to maybe reach into that starting pitching depth that they have, and go get a controllable bat who they could maybe pick up and maybe look at trading a guy like Pablo Lopez, who's a really good pitcher, and maybe trade him and get one of the maybe get one of the A's bats. That sounds like the A's might be making some trades. So maybe you could look at maybe like a Ramon Laureano type guy, or probably you probably need more than just Pablo Lopez to get Matt Olson from him, but somebody like that, somebody who's pretty well established as a good major league hitter, and you can maybe make a move and improve your major league roster that way, and a kind of a win-win type move. So definitely be interesting to look at what the Marlins might do, and one of the more I think that's going to be the Marlins are going to be one of the more interesting teams this offseason because they don't have a huge payroll, but they're definitely in a position where they're going to want to add because they're close with that pitching staff, and when you're close with a pitching staff like that, it's definitely you definitely want to, especially you can't sit around and wait for and see which guys are going to end up being the top guys when you can't just go out and buy more players. So you got to make your decisions now, and I think that's something that they could potentially do, and it might be wise for them.
Yeah, it might really be like you said. They are. I think they're really close, and if they were to get a big bat or two, through a free agency, and maybe then on top of that, even trade one of those younger starters, maybe like a Pablo Lopez, to get another bat, and you'd still have a top of the rotation with, uh, Alcantara. You're gonna have Eliza Hernandez, Trevor Rogers, and then if you get Sixto Sanchez back this year, Edward Cabrera coming up, it, could be a really fun team to watch. But it is interesting to see if they do if they are going to shop one of those starters to get a bat, what kind of, where they're leaning with that. Um, what style bat they're looking for, what position, and the controllability of it. So it'll be pretty interesting to watch with what the Marlins do this year. But let's go ahead and jump over to our free agent predictions. We got 15 of them, so it's going to take us a little bit of time, but we'll start right at the top of the board with Carlos Correa.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I understand that Carlos Correa has gotten offers from Houston already to, I think it was something like a 6 for 150 or 5 for 150 or something like that, which it might have been even something like 6 for 200, but it was something that was really um, probably not quite what he was looking for, and which makes it kind of obvious that he is going to be out the door. And I think there's a lot of teams that could benefit from Correa, but I do think that he's probably not going to be a great fit for a super big market after the cheating scandal. You look at, LA and New York being markets that really aren't fans of Correa, although they probably would change their mind if they were, if he was on their team. But, um, I think that he might go somewhere where he could be a little more comfortable. And I think the Tigers are a team that is close and they're looking to spend a lot of money this offseason. They have money coming off the books. I think they're in pretty good financial shape right now, and he can reunite with his former manager AJ Hinch, who he has a lot of respect for, and he could kind of be the Tigers' version of when the Padres signed Manny Machado right before all those prospects came up, and he could be the guy that comes up and comes in there, kind of is their leader when guys like Torkelson, Riley Green. And all those young pitchers kind of come up and get acclimated to the big leagues, and then in a year or two, they're back in the contention in the AL Central, which is a pretty weak division. So I definitely think Carlos Correa is a guy who I would look at to potentially go up and looking at the Tigers there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a handful of teams, possibly going back to Houston, even Detroit, maybe, but I decided to go out on a little bit of a limb just because I think it would be more of one of the fun fits. And that's with the team we were just talking about. What about Carlos Correa going to the Miami Marlins on a 10-year, $290 million contract?
Yeah, that would be pretty. That would be pretty remarkable, and I mean that would be a fantastic fit for the Marlins too. I mean, we're talking the same similar situation the Tigers. They're a team that's up and coming. Um, I think that's a real similar type thing. I just, I don't know if the Marlins are going to spend that much money, but I mean, I'm sure they could fit in, the 290 million or the 29 million a year payroll with the amount of things that they have right now. So they could probably do it. It's just,
I feel like
be very interesting. So
if there's ever a year they're going to spend, it's going to be this year. And if it's ever going to be a position they're going to spend on, Derek Jeter is going to want to spend on a shortstop. They did re-sign Miguel Rojas to a 2 or 3 year extension, but I mean that's not going to stop you from signing a guy like Carlos Correa, and I think he's just the best fit for that Miami kind of lifestyle and vibe. He just kind of feels like he'd fit in there. Maybe Javi Baez would be a little bit of a better fit, just having them, so much fun and stuff. But I don't know. I think Correa would be a guy that, Miami would say, hey, like we're here to really, make an impact, and then possibly we trade, like you said, maybe we trade for like a Ramon Laureano, and we just got a shortstop, we got a center fielder, we have our young guys with Jazz Chisholm and uh, Brian Anderson still there. Let's see what we can do now with our young starters and our new offensive firepower. So
yeah,
one of the more
definitely be
interesting
interesting.
ones.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and move on to Corey Seager.
Yeah, so I know that the Yankees are badly in need of a shortstop, and I think that Corey Seager is probably the guy that they're looking at, or at least that's been kind of rumored. I think that the Yankees need a left-handed bat. Most of their top bats are right-handed. You look at Aaron Judge as a right-handed bat. You look at Giancarlo Stanton's a right-handed bat. And then some of their other role players are like Gleyber Torres, Gio Urshela, Gary Sanchez if he's back. Some of those guys, they're all right-handed bats, and they could definitely use somebody to hit from the left side and hit for a lot of power. And they are the Yankees; they have the amount of money to be able to do it. And while I do worry about the defensive fit because I don't think Seager is going to stay at short for too long. He's currently not a great defensive shortstop. He's pretty average and maybe below average as a defensive shortstop, although he can still handle the position right now. 2 or 3 years down the line, he might end up having to move to a third base. So, especially with his size, and but I do worry about that for the Yankees. But I have him going there at a 8-year, $230 million contract. Which is close to the same annual value as you're looking at with Carlos Correa, which I don't think I mentioned, I had him for 10 years, 300 million. So it's just 1.25 million less per year, but two less years. But I think that's probably where what would be considered from. I think the Yankees are definitely going to pursue that, and I think Seager would probably listen. So they probably go higher than any other team.
Yeah, Seager. The Yankees are going to get one of these shortstops. I just don't quite think it's Seager. Brian Cashman has already came out and said he was looking for more of a defensive-minded shortstop, or somebody that's at least better defensively than Corey Seager. I mean, he didn't say that exactly, but just the way that he was talking about the way defense is needed at shortstop, I'm not quite sure Corey Seager would be the guy that they want to go after. He'd be a great fit in the stadium, with Yankee Stadium being a lefty bat, but I just don't quite think that would be the place that they would go, at least the with Corey Seager being the shortstop. So I put Corey Seager going to Philadelphia. The Phillies, are looking for a shortstop as well. Didi Gregorius hasn't been what they had hoped he would be. And I had actually the same contract as you, an 8-year, $230 million deal. I just, it's probably not the best fit, but I really struggled with where Seager would go, especially because I wanted him to come back to the Dodgers so much, but I just don't see that happening. So I wanted to lean to the Yankees or maybe even a Seattle, but I don't know. Philly just kind of jumped off the page a little bit more to me.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I worry a little bit about Philly having enough money to spend on the top free agent like Seager because of the current commitments they have to Harper and to Real Muto and to Wheeler and
Mm-hmm.
some of their other guys. But they do have some money coming off the books, I believe, with like McCutcheon maybe it's off the books now, so they could probably make it work. It would just they would be pretty financially handicapped for a long time, but I mean they could definitely pull it off, and they definitely need a shortstop, so it would make sense. So we'll see what might happen there.
Yeah, so we'll jump over to our next one when that's with Marcus Semien.
Yeah, so I have Marcus Simeon. Actually, I have him coming back to Toronto. I think he was a great fit there in their lineup. I think he really enjoyed hitting there, and they kind of believed in him. And I think Toronto's probably got they can really re-sign him to the same amount of money he made last year, but just add just make it a 5-year deal or something. So I got him going back there for $24 million, 5-year, $120 million total, but 24 million per year. I think he was like 18 million, maybe 20 million this past year. So I got Marcus Semien go back to the Blue Jays, and obviously, um, the reasons are shown by how he played with the Blue Jays this past year. So
Yeah, Toronto's a great fit for Semien. I'm just not quite sure that he'll go back there. He did play so well, but I don't know if they'll be able to pay him that amount of money. I'm just kind of hesitant. I think they're going to want to lean more towards trying to develop their younger bats and then try to go more on the pitching side, with Hyun-Jin Ryu getting older, and then losing Robbie Ray as well. I don't know if they're going to commit so much to that bat, especially after signing George Springer last year to a bigger contract. Then you're going to have Vlad, you're going to have Bo Bichette coming up um, in some time, but I think they're going to want to try to build up that pitching staff a little bit more. But a team that I think is going to be really interesting this offseason, and there's already a lot of buzz about them being super aggressive, and wanting to spend money this year, and that's the Seattle Mariners. So I have Marcus Semien going to the Seattle Mariners for a 6-year, $150 million deal. I think he'd be such a good fit there. He'd probably play second, might even play third. They really liked what they got out of J.P. Crawford at shortstop, so I doubt they would move him yet. But Semien could even play shortstop if they did say, hey, like Crawford, let's move you to second base or something. But I think Marcus Simeon would be a great bat to have in the middle of that lineup with a young and upcoming team and a team that wants to be really aggressive this year in free agency.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense for Simeon as well. He is a West Coast guy. He's from the state of California. He's played most of his career with the Oakland A's, so that does make a lot of sense for him to go back out to the West Coast and play there. So that would be another good one for him.
Yeah, so let's jump over and look at where we have Trevor Story going.
Yeah, so Trevor Story is a guy who I think you look at his season this year and you worry a little bit about the decline he had this year. He didn't hit near as well as he had in the past, but this is also a guy who's been a fantastic player and has a long track record. Although it is in Colorado, so he is one of the more interesting uh, guys out of this off season because of the fact that he's in cores and then the having the bad free agent contract year. Um, it could be an interesting situation here where he could bet on himself and sign a really short contract and be a free agent again in a year or two. But I actually have him replacing Carlos Correa with the Houston Astros, as I don't think they're willing to pay Correa as much as he's getting. But I think that something like a 6-year, $130 million type deal is something the Astros could handle. They could use the rest of that money to shore up some other spots that they're saving on not paying Correa, and then your fall off from Correa to Story, if he regains his um his previous form of prior to 2021, you might end up having a guy who's almost, if not just as good as Correa, and is get paid a lot less money. So, and I could definitely see Trevor Story being successful there with the Crawford boxes in left field. That's a great place for right-handed hitters to hit, and it probably doesn't fall off all that much from Coors. So I think Trevor Story to the Astros would be a really good fit.
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting to see what he could do, especially in Minute Maid Park with the Crawford boxes right there. I mentioned that I thought the Yankees were going to get one of these shortstops, and I leaned more towards Trevor Story just because he brought that little bit extra on the defensive side, like Cashman was talking about. And he's a guy who has shown a decent amount of power, being able to go the other way. And I think just in that lineup in Yankee Stadium, he would, the worries about Coors Field, especially with him dipping down this year, I think that was more of a product of just not really having anybody else in that lineup do much around him and protect him. So they just weren't wanting to let him beat them. So I think the Yankees are a team to look out for on Trevor Story. They looked at him before the deadline, for the trade deadline this year. They made a run at trying to trade for him before the Rockies decided not to do that. So I see him going to the Yankees for an 8-year, $200 million contract.
Yeah, it'd be a very interesting move. Obviously, I think the Yankees out there, there's 5 guys out there, and the Yankees are going to be begging all of them to sign there, so they'll get one of them, and it very well could be Story. So
Yeah, well, we'll look at the last of the big 5 shortstops, and that's Javi Baez.
yeah, Javi Baez is one of the more polarizing players for me on this list. He's a guy who has an absolutely atrocious approach at the plate, but has been able to have success regardless, and he's a very good defensive player. Um, I actually have him re-signing with the Mets, although I don't especially feel like that makes too much sense for the Mets because Baez' value is definitely highest when he plays short, and obviously as the Mets have Francisco Lindor playing short, um, Baez would have to move off a short, play second or third, which I think he was playing second most of the time this year after he got traded there, but after the Lindor came back from injury, but I think Baez is a guy who I think he wants to play with Lindor, and I think that he's a guy the Mets are very. He's a very Mets type of player. He's got a lot of flash. He's a lot of he's exciting. I think the Mets are really. I think the Mets front office has been for the last couple of years has been really keen on trying to get more of those exciting flash type players in there. And I think that he's a guy that I would look for as potentially being that type of player. So I think he's resigns, and I had him going for 5 years, $100 million. Although I will say that I wouldn't be shocked if Baez signed a really short like a 1 or 2 year contract for high value and hit the free agent market again because he has had a couple of little bit of down years, so it could be interesting to see there.
Yeah, so you pretty much summed up with Javi Baez exactly what I was thinking, and I actually have him going back to the Mets for the exact same contract, a 5-year, $100 million contract. I think it just makes too much sense for for Javi Baez to go back to the Mets, especially playing with Lindor, and then it seemed like at the towards the end of the year, he and Lindor kind of after the whole thumbs down thing with the fans, they kind of got it going a little bit more. Um, and I think it will be the kind of Javi Baez fit with in New York, a big stage, big media, even if it's not with the Yankees. So, but let's go ahead and move over to our first pitcher that we're going to talk about today, and that's going to be Marcus Stroman.
Yeah, so Marcus Stroman's a guy who's been a real successful pitcher. He has been a heavy ground ball pitcher for most of his career with fairly low strikeouts and low walks. But this year he's starting to get a little bit more swing and miss. He developed a little bit of a splitter. I was reading earlier about how he kind of did that. And definitely a guy who you could see him kind of coming into being the best part of his career now. Um, and I look at the Angels as a team that's going to have some money to spend, and they're a team that really aggressively needs pitching badly. And Stroman's the perfect type of guy for the Angels to to potentially get. So I can see him as a something like a 5-year, $125 million contract. I know that sounds kind of high, but Stroman was actually really good this year. So, I could definitely see him getting something a little bit more than people are kind of expecting, and I think that he could end up being, the kind of the top free agent signing out of all the pitchers this year.
Yeah, Stroman, he's going to be one of the top free agent starters to go off the board. The Angels are absolutely somebody that needs a lot of pitching help, and Stroman would fit quite nicely over there. But I think that he's going to return to one of his former team of the Toronto Blue Jays. I had mentioned that they were, there might be looking to go more towards the pitching side. Stroman obviously still loves Canada a lot. He's all over, always on social media talking about how he loved his time in Toronto, how he loves the fans and everything, and they seem to embrace him when all back on social media and stuff. And I just think that it makes too much sense, and then more of a storybook right here where he returns to Toronto after he got traded. But I have him going for a 4-year, $90 million deal.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. I think that Toronto's a good fit for him still. I mean, he's obviously a guy who um, he was very good there, and return there. It's totally not out of the question because I think he was understanding of why he was traded too. That's kind of a big deal. Sometimes some of these guys who get traded don't really want to go back where they were traded from. They held a grudge a little bit, but I don't think that's the case with Stroman. So definitely be an interesting choice.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and look at Chris Bryant from the San Francisco Giants on where you think he will sign.
Yeah, so Chris Bryant's a really interesting one for many reasons. The first being that while he was so good with his time with the Cubs for the first 3 or 4 years, the shortened season 2020 he wasn't quite as good. 2019 he struggled with some injuries, and then this year he was good, but he wasn't quite what he had been in the past with the back with the when he was with the Cubs. So definitely an interesting move here. And the other thing is that uh, Chris Bryant has so much positional versatility. He's a guy who can play outfield. He can play first base, third base, and I look at a team like the Mariners as a team that could use a guy who can really play left field, third base. He can play anywhere at a high level because they're losing, Kyle Seager at third base, and with the amount of players they have coming up, getting acclimated to the big leagues, whichever ones kind of turn out to be really good, they can move Bryant around to wherever they need the player to need him to play. So say if Kelenic ends up being great in the outfield, then Bryant can play third, or if, say they have their infielders, their young infielders end up playing really well, and they need a corner outfielder because Kellenick hasn't done as well as he was expected to as a prospect, then maybe he ends up being a corner outfielder. So I think it's something where it's a great versatile pickup for a team that has a lot of options for a player. And the Mariners are a team that we were talking about being aggressively looking to spend. And I think that, a 6 year, $150 million contract could probably get the job done with Bryant. And I think that would be a pretty nice pickup for the Mariners.
Yeah, that'd be really fun to watch. Chris Bryant in Seattle. Like I said, they're a team that I really enjoy watching play, and Bryant would be an amazing fit there. But I have him returning to the San Francisco Giants. He was a Bay Area kid, grew up as a Giants fan, and I just think the fit matches what he would want, and they can use that versatility as well. You've seen him start in left field, right field, third base, and have success there with the Giants. So I have him returning there on a 5 year, $115 million deal. With the questions about his durability, the past couple seasons, I think that might have hurt his value just a little bit, and I think he might just take a little bit of a discount just to stay in San Francisco because to kind of play at home.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think, I really did consider the Giants with him, but, I just kind of thought of the fact that the Giants had kind of talked about prioritizing pitching, but you just kind of never know with them, because when they say prioritizing pitching, they might go get four guys who are on 1 year deals like they did this past year and end up being real successful with that. So, um, I think that a reunion with San Francisco would be very, very likely for Bryant as well.
Yeah, and they've been somebody that's really, their offense is kind of what struggled this year. Their pitching kind of was able to carry them. They were able to find, Kevin Gossman and Anthony DeSclafani, Logan Webb's emergence, and I think their offense, can you really hope from, Brandon Belt being able to have hit this year he had, Crawford having the year he had,
Losing
Bust
Posey.
losing Buster Posey, if to retirement, being able to his offense, he had one of his better offensive seasons ever. Mike Yastrzemski's really, came back to earth the past couple seasons. Longoria's getting up there in age. They just have a lot of question marks around that offense. So, being able to re-sign Chris Bryant, I think that will, really help them out. But let's go ahead and look over at probably the biggest free agent starter on the market, and that's Max Scherzer.
Yeah, so for Max Scherzer, I have a hard time believing that the Dodgers aren't going to re-sign one of their pitchers, and I think Max Scherzer ends up being the guy they bring back. He was very good after coming back over to the Dodgers, and the fact that I think the Dodgers have, for the past several years, been kind of um, keen on signing guys to a 1 year or to short term contracts with high AAV, annual value. I think that Scherzer would be the type of player that would fall into that, with given his age. So I have him signing back with Los Angeles Dodgers on a 3 year, $75 million deal.
Yeah, like pretty much what you said. I have a hard time thinking that the Dodgers are going to let him go, especially with the question marks around their pitching staff as we sit right this second with losing Scherzer to the free agents, losing Kershaw out there as of right now, and even with the bullpen losing Jansen. So I have him coming back to the Dodgers as well, but on a 3 year, $90 million deal. Right around that $30 million a year mark. That's supposedly something that Boris really wants him to hit is $30 million a year, and I think it kind of lines up because if Bauer does end up being suspended and goes on the exempt list, that $36 million that he's going to be getting this year will come basically off the books. So Scherzer will basically just take over that salary from it. They already pretty much have it allocated to Bauer, and now it will just go to Scherzer pretty much. But anyways, let's go ahead and jump over to Kevin Gossman and where we think he will go.
Yeah, so Kevin Gossman has the last 2 years with the shortened season being kind of his maybe turnaround. It maybe wasn't quite a breakout in the typical sense, but he really started to show his ability last year, um, in that shortened season. And you look at the fact that coming back this year with the Giants, he accepted that qualifying offer and had a fantastic season. Was an ace level pitcher for most of the year. Struggled just a little bit in the second half compared to the first half, but was exceptionally good this year. And I think that I think he's going to want to stick with the Giants because they kind of remade his career, turned him back into turned him into what people kind of thought he could end up being back, and they were the kind of the team that unlocked that with him. So I think he's will show a lot of loyalty to the Giants for that reason. Want to stay in their system, and I think he accepts something like a 4-year, $65 million deal. I think maybe his previous track record, of only really having one, breakout season will probably hold his value back just a little bit. But something like a 4-year, $65 million contract would seem to make sense for me for Kevin Gausman in a return to the Giants.
Yeah, I seriously considered Gossman going back to the Giants, especially since he's had a lot of success there. The ballpark kind of fits what he likes to do, and he's he seemed to really like the area in general. But I had him going to the Angels just because what we talked about, that they're going to have to get one of these bigger name pitchers. And with Stroman going back to Toronto and Scherzer coming back to the Dodgers, I feel like Gossman would be the next guy the Angels would look at. And I have him signing for 4 years, $72 million. So roughly about $6 million overall, more than what you had. But um, I just think he's kind of going to be the guy that the Angels kind of feel fits them the best.
Yeah, no doubt that'd be another really good fit for Gossman.
Yeah, so we'll go on to Freddie Freeman, and I think we're both gonna have him re-signing in the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah, I mean, Freddie Freeman's a guy who you just can't imagine him playing in a different uniform. He's coming off of a World Series, and um, you know he's in the prime of his career right now. He won the MVP in 2020 in the shortened season. He's really the heart and soul of the Braves, and it's a situation where the Braves have lots of money right now to spend. They're supposedly having a fairly large increase in payroll after the World Series win. And Freddie Freeman was already being paid over $20 million a year, so just a little bit above that is not a huge jump. And I mean, I think he's gonna test. I think the Braves are gonna let him test the market so they can see what the fair market value for him is, and he takes something around that, or maybe even a little bit less, to return to Atlanta. And I have him something like a 6-year, $165 million deal, which is a very substantial contract at $27.5 million per year, very high AAV, but probably one of the highest you would ever see for a 31-year-old first baseman. But Freddie Freeman's the type of player that would be worth that, and the fact of the matter is that Freddie Freeman's got a type of game that will probably age pretty well, as to go along with it. So I could definitely see him keeping his consistency going into his age 35, 36, 37-year-old seasons. So I think a 6-year, $165 million deal, maybe even a little bit more than that money wise, would make sense for Freddie.
Yeah, I have Freddie returning to the Braves as well. You like you said, you can't imagine him being in any other uniform. But I have him coming back for a little less money. The Braves have been really well about having their players take a little bit less money, or taking a lot less money to kind of stay there or sign longer contracts. But so I have him returning to 6 years, but for 150 million. For an AAV of about $25 million a year. I could see that being a deal that Freddie would accept. But let's go ahead and move over, and we'll look at one of probably the top utility bat. I mean, if you would say, Chris Bryant would probably be more of a one position person if he signed somewhere more than a utility, but they could use it. But let's look at Chris Taylor and where we think he will go.
Yeah, Chris Taylor's a very interesting guy. He probably had the best season of his career this year, and he plays any position you want him to play, which makes him more of that traditional utility guy, more so than Bryant, who can play first, third, play on the corners. So I think I agree with you. Taylor really is more of the traditional utility bat type guy, um, but he's a really good player. He can play anywhere, and I think a team like maybe the Phillies would be a really good fit for him because they have a few different holes that they could maybe plug him in. You can plug Taylor in at shortstop. Phillies have a hole at shortstop. You can plug him in center field. The Phillies have a hole in center field. Any of the corner outfielders, they don't have a left fielder. So, Chris Taylor's a really good player to be able to kind of plug in wherever. And and be a really solid player. And I think he would improve their defense wherever he's played at, and would be a really nice pickup for the Phillies. I have him signing for something like a 5 year, $85 million contract. And I wouldn't be super shocked if he's not this year's Kike Hernandez, who gets into more of a. I mean, Taylor was really already playing every day, but kind of more of the a role that is kind of a star on the team type role, and ends up having a really good season, similar to what Kike Hernandez did. So I have Chris Taylor in Philly for about 5 years, won it for $85 million.
Yeah, Chris Taylor is a really fun player to watch. He's somebody like you said can play everywhere, plays 100% all the time. Um, I just think he's too valuable for the Dodgers to really let go, especially letting Kike Hernandez go last year. It kind of always felt like it was going to be one or the other that they were going to re-sign and pay. And I think that Taylor has a good enough track record with the Dodgers about being able to play everywhere and consistently get consistent playing time that that they're not going to let him walk really. So I have him coming back on a 5 year, $75 million deal. Possibly to maybe even be a starting third baseman if we get the DH and with maybe giving Turner some more days off over there. So it'll be interesting to see what Taylor's market's like because he could fit with pretty much any team and fit really well. Well, let's look over at Robbie Ray and where we think he'll go.
Yeah, so Robbie Ray, he just had his breakout season, and I think he's a little bit similar to Gossman, except that I think Robbie Ray's been known to have the stuff that he's got now, and he's had a couple really good seasons in the past before these past years, like where Kevin Gossman maybe not quite as much. He really was a true breakout, whereas Robbie Ray is kind of a resurgence, and he's better than he's ever been before. But he had already had a couple really good seasons. And I have him going back to Toronto. I think they got enough money to spend. And with Robbie Ray, I mean, it's a little bit similar to that Gossman situation. Is that I think that a return to where they kind of unlocked what was what kind of made sense to him and what worked for him this year. I think a return there makes a lot of sense for Robbie Ray. He might favor going back there, and I have him actually. I mean, as a guy who's probably going to win the Cy Young Award in the American League, he's going to be a lot more pricey than Gossman. I have him signing for 6 years, $125 million. So pretty hefty price, but I do have him going back to Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto would be a fantastic fit for him, especially like you said, since he's most likely going to win the Cy Young this year. Kind of go back to the place where you had your success. But with them already, in my mind, resign or going back and getting Marcus Stroman, I put Robbie Ray going to Seattle for 5 years, $135 million. I said they were going to be a team that's going to be aggressive. Earlier when I had them signing Marcus Simeon, I think that pitching rotation needs a little bit of help as well. We have Marco Gonzalez, you have younger guys coming up. But if you can get a guy like Robbie Ray, who if he pitches like a top of the rotation guy, like he should, now that could be another step for Seattle to really make a move and make a run at maybe that NL West against that Houston and maybe even a deeper playoff run. So I'd be really interested to see what Robbie Ray could do with the Seattle Mariners. But let's go ahead and jump over to Nick Castellanos and where we think he'll go.
Yeah, so Nick Castellanos is interesting. He just turned down that option, and I actually have him, and this is kind of a weird one, but I have him go to the Texas Rangers. I think the Rangers are gonna try to spend money this offseason, and I'm looking at a lot of these free agents that I think are probably not gonna want to go to a team that's most likely still rebuilding. But I think it would make a little bit of sense for Nick Castellanos as a guy who, he's probably going to get paid more by a team like the Rangers than he will get paid by, a contender. I think he's probably on down the list for a lot of contenders because of the lack of defense he can play. But if you're the Rangers, he's a good bat to put in the middle of that lineup, good clubhouse presence. And he's kind of shown that in the past he's been willing to sign with a team that wasn't especially expected to be, the best team in baseball or anything like when he signed with the Reds. So um, I think that Castellanos, the Rangers, makes a little bit of sense. I actually have him at 4 years for $85 million. I could definitely see him signing with a contender, but for whatever reason, I just kind of thought that the Rangers were going to spend money on somebody, and on the list, I just kind of came across Castellanos and thought that he might be interesting for them. So I went ahead and went with that.
Yeah, Nick Castellanos, he's going to be one of the more interesting ones because, like you said, the lack of defense. But are we getting the universal DH this year? So will an NL team be able to pay up for that? What's he going to want contract wise? What's he going to get contract wise because of that lack of defense and maybe being a potential full time DH? So mine's a little bit weirder. I'm not very confident in it, but I put him going down to the San Francisco Giants for a 5-year, $100 million deal, right around that $20 million a year. I talked already about how their offense is going to be able to, going to be taking a step back, losing Posey with Belt, Crawford, Longoria. And if we definitely do get the full time DH, I think Nick Castellanos, adding him into that lineup, like I said, their offense has been one that struggled. He's been one of the better hitters the past couple years in baseball, probably the past 3 or 4 years. He would kind of add another life to that offense, right there with Chris Bryant as well.
Yeah, it'd definitely be interesting. And like I said, I mean, Castellanos is a guy who, if we get that universal DH, there's a lot of teams who could be in on him. But like, I just don't know if he's at kind of at the top of the list for a lot of them. Like, he just seems to me like a guy who is going to be one of those, like, he would be the prized free agent of the offseason for a team like the Rangers. So they'll probably go high on him. But I don't think he's going to get quite the financial what he's going to want from some of the more contending teams. Like a lot of these teams that are I have signing like Correa, Seager, Simi. Like I just don't know, but the Giants would make sense. I mean, and the fact of the matter is, everyone needs a bat. So
Right.
you just don't know where you're going to put him. So a National League team makes a lot of sense for Castellanos because the potential that those spots are open for like a DH. So definitely interesting place there, and also the fact that he can man a corner outfield. He's not like David Ortiz in his later years where he just could not play a position. Like he can man a corner outfield at a subpar level, but you know, he's not very good out there. So um, we'll see what maybe happens with Castellanos. I think it'll be an interesting one to watch.
He absolutely will be. Well, let's jump over. We got two more free agents on our list, but the first of those being Starling Marte.
Yeah, so I have Starling Marte. I'm looking at the Mets for him. The Mets badly need a center fielder, because Nemo is really not a good defender there, and they can slide Nemo over because Conforto is a free agent, and I think Starling Marte makes a lot of sense. He is kind of up there in age for a free agent. I think he's 32 or 33 years old. So I have him getting a shorter deal, but 4-year, $85 million deal coming off the best season of his career. I don't know if he's a player that's going to age especially well because a lot of his skill is tied up in his speed. But he's definitely a guy who for a couple more years can play center field at a pretty good level and gives you a lot of excitement, speed, and a good play a good center field and give you a nice bat in that lineup too. I think that makes a lot of sense for him to go to the Mets.
Yeah, the Mets are a team that could really use him. Especially if they do lose Conforto, you can put Nimmo back in right field and let him play over there and get a true center fielder. Even though Nimmo's been really good the past couple years defensively, but I have him going to another NL East team, and that's the Phillies. They're a team that has really battled with trying to find a true center fielder. And Marte could do that for him for 2 to 3 years and let them find somebody else and then move him over to left field probably for a year or two. But I have him going for a 4-year, $65 million deal. I'm just not quite sure what he's going to get overall money wise, just being that older kind of a free agent. Um, an older center fielder, I should say, for a free agent market, and that, the decline is coming sometime soon since his number one thing has been speed for so long. He's turned into a better power hitter the last couple of years, but I could see him being a center fielder for 2 of the 3 or 2 to 4 or 2 of the 4 years, and then maybe sliding over to a corner for those last couple of years or so. But I think Philly would be a good fit for him. So let's go ahead and move on to the last person on our list, and that's we wanted to add one relief pitcher, and then Kenley Jansen is probably the top reliever, but we think this guy's probably going to get a longer and more lucrative contract, and that's Raisel Iglesias.
Yeah, so on that decision, Kenley Jansen being an older guy, and having a little bit of a couple hiccups the last couple years, although he looked really good down the stretch this year, a little bit difficult to project him to be higher. But Raisel Iglesias is a little younger, coming off his career year. Actually, the Braves signing Raisel Iglesias, I think the Braves have a little bit of extra money to spend this year, and I think that he's a guy who fits perfectly what the Braves need. The bullpen, they need a good right-handed reliever. They do have Luke Jackson, but he's really their only one, and he's not, like a lockdown type guy. And I think that Raisel Iglesias, with a lot of closing experience, makes sense for the Braves too, because while Will Smith did really well in the postseason, Will Smith also had a lot of hiccups this year, and there's reason to believe he's not quite the type of closer that a contending team would like to have. So, I look at Raisel Iglesias as a guy maybe signing something similar to what Will Smith signed a few years ago. I have him at 3 years, $35 million, and I think the Braves are going to have a little bit of extra payroll space to spend in the offseason. And I think that he's a pretty good pretty good way to spend that money.
Yeah, Iglesias is one of the more interesting ones because he's probably the best closer out there. Depending on what you think of Kenley Jansen, he's definitely going to be the best one for longer term. Um, and a team that I think just really struggled with their bullpen, especially this year. And their closer is a little bit of an older guy, and that maybe Iglesias is able to come in and take that closing spot because their closer has worked as an eighth inning guy before, or they could flip him around. But I have Iglesias going to the Padres. There's somebody that's really struggled with pitching, especially in that bullpen. It was really awful this year. And Emilio Pagan's just not really the guy that they were hoping he would be for that seventh, eighth inning bridge to a guy like Mark Melancon. And if you're going to want to compete in that NL West, you're going to have to be able to close games out late in it, and even if they're being close games. So Iglesias is a guy who can work as a seventh or eighth inning guy, or he could even close if Melanson, will jump over to the eighth inning or something, or they can just use whoever's the best matchup at the time. But I think Raisel Iglesias would be a great fit for the Padres.
Yeah, he would make a lot of sense for them. So, especially with losing Melanson to free agency.
Oh, is Melanson a free agent too? I didn't even notice that.
I believe so.
Oh, he is. Huh. Well, there you go. He doesn't even have to worry about Melanson sliding to the eighth inning. Then he'd take over the closing role right away. So, just quickly because award season's coming up, and I know we've gone long, but we wanted to kind of just mention it, and we don't have to go so in depth. We can talk about it more next week. But Rookie of the Year awards are going to be announced by the time we record our next episode. So we just kind of wanted to give you who we think would be the winners. In the American League, the finalists are Randy Arozarena, Wander Franco, and Astros pitcher Luis Garcia. And then in the National League, the finalists are Dylan Carlson, Jonathan India, and Trevor Rogers.
So when it comes to the American League, I think that my pick is probably Wander Franco, but I think he will be the pick. I think especially with the prospect pedigree that he had coming up and the season he had down the stretch with that long base streak he had and kind of leading that front lineup. I think both of the other guys, especially Randy Rosarena, who got a lot of hype for this award coming into the season, had fantastic years. You might give them a little bit of a nod due to the fact that they were both there the entire season, whereas Franco came up mid-season. But I think Wander Franco is probably my choice here. He definitely was the best player of the three, but he just didn't play quite as long. So I think Wander Franco's the guy.
Yeah, I would lean probably Randy Rosarena just because he had that full season. If Franco had come up maybe even a month earlier, I'd give him the award. It's really close between them, but I think just given the nod that Rosarena had been there the entire season, is probably going to give him the nod for Rookie of the Year if I had to pick one. But if we're going to look over at the National League award, I think that's Jonathan India's award to lose. He was so good this year. He being a leadoff guy for the Cincinnati Reds, locking down that second base spot. he'd been a really good prospect coming up, but I don't think anybody expected him to have the type of season he even had this year, and really gave the player or really gave the Reds a player to look forward to as they're going into kind of this rebuild scenario.
Yeah, and I totally agree that India probably wins the award. I would give a little bit more consideration to Trevor Rogers than it sounds like. It sounds like everyone's kind of thinking India's kind of the runaway, which I think he is because I think that's how people are going to vote. But I would give a little bit of consideration to Trevor Rogers because when he pitched, he was incredible this year. For a guy who kind of came out of nowhere, he was a high-rated prospect, but maybe not like he wasn't like a top 20 prospect in baseball or something. And but yeah, Jonathan India had a fantastic season. I think he will be the pick there, but definitely good for him. And then the other award that's going to be given out before our next episode is Manager of the Year. Just briefly mentioning, I don't think we even had this written down to talk about, but I was going to mention, I think the NL would be Gabe Kapler with the season he had with the Giants, and kind of put together that run that they had. And then for the AL, I think Alex Cora, they've really exceeded expectations this year, making it to the American League Championship Series. So, but of course, the fact that they were both projected to be 500 teams at best coming in, and then ended up in you know being two of the better teams in baseball, I think is gonna get them the nods this year.
Oh, Alex Cora isn't even a finalist, by the way.
Is he not?
No, it's Dusty Baker, Kevin Cass, and Scott Service.
Wow. It'll go to Scott Service then because of the season that Seattle had. But man, I really don't understand. I guess they don't like him because of the cheating allegations from a couple years ago. But I really don't understand how you couldn't have Alex Cora. I mean, it's obvious that in 2018, they didn't have or 2018 they had Alex Cora and they went to the World Series and won the World Series. 2018, 2019 they had him and were really good. 2020 all of a sudden they don't have him and they suck, and then 2021 they have him again and they're good again. So it kind of would make sense to me, but I thought he was a finalist, but I'm mistaken. But I would go with Scott Service for sure. That even though they didn't make the playoffs, that was an incredible run the Mariners had this year with the talent they had. Real similar, honestly, because you look at Cora and Kapler as two guys who exceeded expectations, and obviously Service might have exceeded expectations more so than either one of those guys did. So definitely deserving for him as well.
Yeah, I would have Scott Service in the American League as well, just for everything you just said. And the National League, it's going to be Gabe Kapler, just because of the run that they made. Being the team that most people didn't even think were going to make the playoffs, and being the best team in baseball. But not a little part of me, a big part of me wants this award to just go to Mike Schilt after they fired him, just as one little like middle finger to the St. Louis Cardinals of like, hey, you just had the manager of the year in the National League, and then you just fired him because you weren't you didn't see eye to eye on stuff.
Yeah, and Mike Schilt honestly makes sense because that team was probably worse once you got into the season and you saw the talent that the Giants really did have. I mean, that team was really probably not as talented as the Giants, and they scraped together a second half. That clubhouse kept together, and Schilt led them to the playoffs. So,
That
I mean,
run
that
they
really
had.
does make sense that Schilt could win the award. Although Kapler's easily going to win it.
Yeah,
Schilt, it would make a lot of sense, honestly, for Schilt to win that award, but definitely
absolutely.
interesting. So.
But next week we'll look up the MVP awards, the Cy Young awards. We'll preview those, and then give you a rundown of how kind of the voting and stuff went for these awards, and anything that happens going up into the. We'll give you the final, qualifying offer decisions. I don't expect anybody else would, accept or decline really outside of the guys we mentioned. But we'll give you that next week, and then anything else that's happening. It's off season time, so we don't really know what we're going to be talking about from week to week. So. You want to wrap up on anything?
I think we're good here. Like I said before, there's a lot of big names this offseason. We went down that long list and we didn't even mention some guys. I mean, Clayton Kershaw's a free agent. Kenley Jansen's a free agent. Anthony Rizzo's a free agent. Justin Verlander's a free agent. Even guys like Brandon Belt.
Conforto,
Conforto, Carlos
Rodon.
Rodon, Noah
Yeah.
Syndergaard, John Gray, all these guys are going to sign pretty lucrative contracts. This is a really good and deep free agent class, and it will be interesting to see how things end up going with with the CBA and when guys might sign. I think some of the top players are probably going to wait, while some of the mid range players probably sign fairly early. But And then they're also going to have guys like like Jorge Soler, who was the MVP of the World Series this year. Some of those types of players. Hey, Mark Melanson, who's a really good veteran reliever. And then you got some of those lower key signings. Andrew McCutcheon, who's a long-time veteran player who has at times been MVP level player. You're gonna have a lot of those type of guys, and then you've got the one other guy, the Japanese Seiya Suzuki. It's going to be very interesting to watch and see where he signs. Because a lot of people are really high on him to come over and be a high level major leaguer. So we'll see what ends up happening. It's going to be very interesting off season, and I'm excited to see how it goes. So
I really am too. So thank you guys for tuning into this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
thanks everybody.